So we've learned a lot about networks so far, and what we've learned is that a network is two or more devices connected together, and that we like networks because they allow us to share information, they allow us to share physical resources, and then if we're going to connect devices together, we can do that either with wires or we can do it wirelessly. And when we do it with wires, we could use Ethernet, we could use coaxial cable, or we could use fiber optic. If we do it wirelessly, often it will be a Wi-Fi, which is also sometimes known as a hotspot or a wireless access point, and also sometimes referred to as 802.11 ABG&N or something like that, which is the wireless standard. So we've learned that we can connect either with wires or wirelessly. Then we've learned that when we do connect them, we get to choose the topology, and that the most common topology is the star topology, where we have all the computers kind of connected to a central location. And that when we put those together, we need to determine what kind of a role will each device on this network play. And so that's sometimes known as architecture, like the client-server architecture or the peer-to-peer architecture. So we learned about that. We learned about rules of communication or protocols. We learned about bandwidth and broadband and narrowband. We've also learned about signal conversion and what modems do, modulating and demodulating signals from the digital state to the analog state and then back to the digital state as they go over like the phone network. And then we've also learned how data could transmit either in a serial form or a parallel form, so serial transmission or parallel transmission. And we've also learned about simplex, half duplex, and full duplex communication. We learned about circuit switching and packet switching. Now what we're going to learn about are hubs, switches, and routers. And basically what hubs are is a way, hubs and switches, right? Here are switches, here are hubs. And you can see just from these pictures, right? Like, look at this hub. Kind of old school looking, right? Kind of old school looking. And here's even something else that comes up with hub. That's a little bit better. Looks a little bit newer. Let's stick with these here though. Like here's an old hub. It even says hub on it. Hub's a way we can connect a few computers together. So that's a hub. A switch is a more sophisticated, larger way we can connect a lot of computers together. So there would be a switch right there. And here's a switch with a whole bunch of Ethernet cables going into it. That's kind of cool to look at. I'm just looking to see if there's more switches with a lot going into it. All right, we'll stick with that. Here's one. How about that image? Very cool. Tons of Ethernet going into those switches, connecting a lot of different computers together. So those are switches. And hubs are sort of very rudimentary. Switches have more sophistication. And the main distinction between the two is that a hub, when data is sent from one computer like this, it then gets broadcast out to every computer. And that's not such a good thing for two reasons. One, it uses up the network resources, so it's adding extra traffic to the resource. And two, if this computer is trying to send it to this computer and it goes to everybody, then everyone else has the possibility, the potential to be looking at what was intended for just this one person right here. So those are two disadvantages of hubs. Switches will switch where the data is going. So if I'm trying to send it to one computer, it will switch so that the data goes just to that one computer. It'll send the data to that one computer. So that's an advantage of a switch. And switches are really, the core of creating a network. And you need switches to create networks in a business or in a classroom, in a school. You're going to be using switches to create networks. And what is the difference between a switch and a router? I went to Cisco's website to get a little, clarification on this for you, and just to kind of show you Cisco and show you what Cisco has to say about it, because Cisco is like the main manufacturer of networking equipment in the world, at least from my understanding. And Cisco says, what's the difference between a switch and a router? Switches create a network, routers connect networks, right? So a router is going to allow us, once our network's connected, once our network is created with switches, the router is going to allow us to connect to other networks. So it's going to allow us to connect to the internet, or it's going to allow us to connect to various other networks. And routers are really going to help route traffic across many different networks to different locations. The routers will be able to find a route to our destination when we're sending stuff. So that's kind of the difference between a hub, a switch, and a router. They're terms that you hear thrown around all the time. Mostly as consumers, when we go shopping, we see things like wireless routers, right? Like this guy is pretty dang common. You see that a lot. Or some of these guys here. Yeah, so those are the kind of wireless routers that we see in the marketplace. All right, so that is hubs, least sophisticated, switches, the sort of more sophisticated way of connecting all the computers together, and basically what you use when you create a network. And routers are going to be they're going to look actually a lot like switches. They're going to look a lot like switches, but routers allow us to connect to other networks. So that's what those three things do.